The knife slipped from Elena's raw hand and clattered against the stone floor of the kitchen, echoing through the empty castle halls at 3 in the morning. She froze, breath caught in her throat, listening for footsteps that never came. No one was awake to hear it. No one ever was. She bent down, picked it up, and kept scrubbing the pot that had already been clean for the last 10 minutes, because if she stopped moving, she would start crying again, and she had promised herself she would not cry tonight. 6 months earlier, Elena Hartley had walked into Alpha Damien Voss's castle wearing a wedding dress that did not belong to her, carrying a name that did not belong to her either. The alliance between the Ashwood pack and the Voss pack had been signed in ink and sealed with her marriage, a transaction disguised as a wedding. She had met Damien only twice before the ceremony. Both times he had looked past her, not at her, as though she were a formality, standing between him and the next border dispute waiting on his desk. The pack elders called it an honor. Elena's own father had called it a duty. No one had asked Elena what she called it. On the morning after the wedding, she woke alone in a bedroom larger than her entire childhood home, the sheets cold on the side where a husband was supposed to sleep. She dressed herself because no maid arrived to help her, and when she walked down to the great hall expecting breakfast with her new husband, she found only silence, and a servant who told her, without meeting her eyes, that the Alpha had already left for the northern border, and would not return for 3 days. That was the first morning. It would not be the last. Cassandra, the wife of Beta Callum, was the one who greeted Elena properly that first week, with a smile so practiced it looked almost real. She showed Elena around the castle, introduced her to the staff, and explained, in a voice dripping with false sweetness, which rooms were appropriate for the new Luna and which were not. Elena did not yet understand that Cassandra had wanted the position of Luna for herself, had believed for years that Callum would rise to Alpha and she would rule beside him, until Damien's father had chosen differently, and until Damien had been forced into a marriage that made Cassandra's dream impossible. Elena did not know this. She only knew that Cassandra's smile never reached her eyes, and that within a month, small things had begun to go wrong. Her invitations to pack gatherings arrived a day late, or not at all. Her meals were served cold, or not served at first, until she learned to ask the kitchen staff directly. Her requests to the seamstress were quietly ignored, so that she wore the same 3 dresses for months, while new fabric arrived for other members of the household. She noticed all of it, and she said nothing, because complaining felt like weakness, and Elena had been raised to believe that a wife's silence was a virtue. Damien noticed none of it. He was the alpha king of a pack still recovering from a war with the Garrick pack to the east, a war his father had left half-finished before he died, a war that Damien now carried on his own shoulders along with everything else. He spent his days in meetings about grain shortages and disputed hunting grounds, and his nights reviewing reports by candlelight until his eyes burned. He had married Elena because the treaty required it, and once the treaty was signed, he considered the matter closed. He assumed, the way busy men often assume, that everything was fine simply because no one had told him otherwise. Elena began to disappear into the rhythm of the castle. She woke early and went to bed late, filling the hours in between with quiet tasks nobody asked her to do, because at least the tasks made her feel useful, made her feel like she belonged somewhere, even if it was the kitchen and not the throne room. She learned the names of every servant before any of them learned to trust her. She learned which floorboards creaked and which stairs to avoid, so she would not draw attention to herself when she moved through the halls at night, unable to sleep in a bed that felt more like a cage than a home. On the nights when the loneliness became too heavy to carry silently, she wrote letters to her mother, who had died 3 winters before the wedding. She never sent them, because there was nowhere to send them, but writing them felt like speaking to someone who would have listened. "Dearest mother," she wrote one night by candlelight, "I do not think he sees me. I do not think anyone here sees me. I smile at the gatherings and I curtsy at the right moments, and I go to sleep alone in a room meant for 2 people, and I wonder if this is what all marriages are, or if I have simply been unlucky." She folded the letter and placed it in a small wooden box beneath her bed, alongside a dozen others just like it. Mira, Damien's younger sister, was the first person in the castle who looked at Elena and saw something other than a political arrangement. Mira was 17, sharp-eyed, and far more observant than the adults around her gave her credit for. She noticed that Elena often excused herself early from dinners, that her laughter at jokes never quite reached her eyes, that she flinched slightly whenever Cassandra entered a room. Mira did not understand why, not yet, but she filed each small detail away, the way a hunter tracks footprints, before finding the animal that made them. One evening, after a gathering where Cassandra had made a sharp comment about Elena's plain dress in front of several pack members, Mira found Elena slipping quietly toward the kitchen, instead of returning to her room. Mira followed at a distance and found her sister-in-law standing at the counter, gripping the edge of it so hard her knuckles had turned white, tears sliding silently down her face. Elena startled when she noticed Mira in the doorway and wiped her face quickly, forcing a smile that fooled no one. "I am fine," she said. "Just tired. Long day." Mira did not believe her, but she did not push. Instead, she simply sat down across from her at the small kitchen table, the one meant for staff rather than royalty, and asked if Elena wanted company while she made tea. It was a small gesture, but it was the first kindness Elena had received in the castle that did not come with a hidden condition attached, and something in her chest loosened, just slightly, for the first time in months. "Please do not tell your brother," Elena said quietly, once the tea had been poured. "He has enough to worry about with the border and the elders. This is nothing." Mira wanted to argue that it was not nothing, that Eluna should not be sitting alone in a kitchen crying at midnight while the rest of the castle slept peacefully. But she saw the pleading look in Elena's eyes and made a promise she would later regret keeping. The following weeks brought no relief. If anything, Cassandra grew bolder, sensing perhaps that Elena would not fight back, that Damien remained too absorbed in his duties to notice the slow erosion happening beneath his own roof. Meals continued to arrive late. A formal dinner with visiting dignitaries from a neighboring territory was planned, without informing Elena until an hour before it began, leaving her scrambling to prepare while Cassandra calmly informed the guests that the new Luna was simply unaccustomed to castle life yet, a comment delivered with a smile that made it sound like concern rather than cruelty. Elena began losing weight from the stress and the long hours of quiet, unnecessary labor she took upon herself. Her sleep grew thin and fractured. She grew paler, quieter, more careful in every movement, as though trying to take up less space in a world that had already made clear it did not want her taking up any space at all. And still, Damien noticed nothing beyond a vague sense that something in the castle felt heavier than before, an unease he attributed to the ongoing tension with the Garrick pack, rather than to anything happening within his own walls. It was a night in early winter when everything shifted. Damien had returned from a tense meeting with pack elders about a proposed peace agreement with Garrick's territory, his mind exhausted and his stomach empty, having skipped dinner entirely to argue over borders that seemed to shift meaning every time he studied the maps. He wandered toward the kitchen for bread and cold meat, expecting to find the room dark and empty at that hour, the way it always was. Instead, he found the kitchen dimly lit by a single candle, and his wife standing at the basin, scrubbing pots that had clearly already been washed, her shoulders shaking silently, tears falling steadily down her face as she worked. She had not heard him enter. For a long moment, Damien simply stood in the doorway, unable to move, staring at a version of Elena he had never allowed himself to truly see before. This was not the composed, quiet Luna, who curtsied politely at gatherings and answered questions with careful, measured words. This was a woman who looked utterly alone, exhausted in a way that went far beyond physical tiredness, her hands raw and reddened from work that no Luna should ever have needed to do herself in a castle full of staff. Something cracked open in Damien's chest at the sight of her, something uncomfortable and unfamiliar, a recognition that he had failed someone without ever realizing there had been anything to fail at. "Elena," he said softly, and she jumped, spinning around so quickly that a pot nearly slipped from her hands. She wiped her face hurriedly with the back of her wrist, the way she always did, the way that had become so automatic it barely registered as a habit anymore. "My lord," she said, her voice unsteady despite her best effort to sound composed. "I did not expect you back so soon. I can prepare something for you to eat, if you are hungry." "Elena," he said again, stepping further into the room, his eyes fixed on her red hands, and the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. "Why are you doing this? Why are you here, alone, at this hour, scrubbing pots the kitchen staff should be handling?" "I do not mind the work," she said quickly, too quickly. "It gives me something to do." "Something to do," he repeated slowly, and for the first time, he truly looked at her, not as an obligation fulfilled by a treaty, but as a person standing in front of him, who had clearly been suffering in silence for longer than he wanted to admit. "Elena," he said, his voice gentler now, "why are you crying?" She opened her mouth to deny it, to offer the same explanation she had given Mira weeks earlier. Tiredness. A long day. Nothing worth mentioning. But something in his expression, some crack of genuine concern breaking through the exhaustion on his own face, made the words die in her throat. Instead, she simply looked at him, and for the first time since her wedding day, she allowed herself to stop pretending, if only for a moment, that everything was fine. "I am tired," she whispered finally, and the words carried a weight far heavier than the sentence itself suggested. "I am tired of being invisible, in a castle where I am supposed to belong. I am tired of pretending I do not notice when I am left out, when my requests are ignored, when I am spoken about as though I am not standing in the room. I did not ask for any of this, my lord, but I tried to accept it with grace, because I believed that was my duty. I did not realize duty could feel this lonely." Damien said nothing for a long moment, the silence in the kitchen stretching between them, filled only by the faint crackle of the candle and the distant sound of wind against the castle walls. He felt something he could not immediately name, a mixture of guilt and anger, and a strange, unfamiliar ache that made his chest feel tight. He had built walls, allies, and defenses to protect his pack from every external threat imaginable, yet he had failed entirely to notice the quiet suffering happening within his own household, beneath his own roof, to the very woman he had promised, however reluctantly, to protect. "I did not know," he said finally, his voice low. "I should have known. I am sorry, Elena. I am truly sorry." She did not know how to respond to an apology she had never expected to receive, so she simply nodded, unable to trust her own voice, not to break entirely, if she spoke again. Damien stepped closer, close enough that she could see the sincerity in his expression, the exhaustion in his own eyes matching hers, in a way she had never noticed before. "This ends tonight," he said quietly. "Whatever has been happening here, whatever I have failed to see, it ends tonight. You are my Luna, and you deserve far better than what this castle has given you." Elena wanted to believe him. Some quiet, cautious part of her heart, the part that had spent months learning to expect disappointment, warned her not to trust words spoken in the emotional aftermath of an unexpected discovery. But another part of her, exhausted and starved for even the smallest kindness, allowed itself to hope, just slightly, that things might finally begin to change. Neither of them knew yet how deep the damage truly ran, how many small cruelties had accumulated in the shadows of the castle over the past several months, or how much work it would take to undo them. But for the first time since her wedding day, Elena did not feel entirely alone standing in that kitchen. And for the first time in longer than he wanted to admit, Damien understood that being an Alpha King meant more than defending borders and negotiating treaties. It meant protecting the people closest to him, especially the ones who had been suffering quietly, right beneath his own roof, waiting for someone to finally notice. Morning came too quickly, after a night that had changed everything, and nothing all at once. Elena woke in her cold, empty bed, half convinced that the kitchen conversation with Damien had simply been a dream, born from exhaustion and loneliness. She lay still for a long moment, staring at the ceiling, replaying his words in her mind, testing them for sincerity, the way one tests ice, before stepping onto a frozen lake. "This ends tonight," he had said. But mornings in the Voss castle had a habit of erasing whatever promises the night had made. She dressed slowly, choosing one of her 3 worn dresses, and made her way to the dining hall expecting the usual silence, the usual absence of her husband, the usual cold breakfast eaten alone while staff moved around her, as though she were furniture. Instead, she found Damien already seated at the head of the table, and beside him, an empty chair pulled out, clearly meant for her. "Good morning," he said, rising slightly as she entered, a gesture so unfamiliar that Elena hesitated in the doorway before finding her voice. "Good morning, my lord," she answered carefully, taking the offered seat. "Damien," he corrected gently, "please. After last night, I think we are past such formal distance, Elena." She nodded, unsure how to respond, and reached for the tea that had been poured for her, still warm, still fresh, a small detail that would have seemed unremarkable in any other household, but felt almost startling in this one. Throughout breakfast, Damien asked her questions he had never thought to ask before. How she had slept, whether she had settled into the castle, what she missed most about her childhood home. Elena answered carefully at first, still testing the sincerity behind his sudden attention, but as the meal continued and his questions remained genuine, something in her began, cautiously, to soften. Word of the changed atmosphere spread through the castle by midday, the way news always does among staff who watch everything and say nothing. Cassandra heard of it first from a servant girl eager to please her, delivered the information about Damien escorting Elena personally through the Eastern Gardens that afternoon, an activity entirely unlike the Alpha King's usual schedule. Cassandra's expression tightened as she absorbed the news, though she said nothing aloud. For months, she had operated under the comfortable assumption that Damien's indifference toward his wife would remain permanent, that Elena would continue fading quietly into the background of castle life, while Cassandra maintained her own quiet influence over household matters. The sudden shift unsettled her deeply, though she was careful not to let anyone see how deeply. Meanwhile, in the Eastern Gardens, Damien walked beside Elena, along a stone path lined with frost-covered rose bushes, their conversation slow and careful, two strangers attempting to become something else entirely. "I want to understand what happened," Damien said finally, breaking a comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Not just last night, but the months before it. I need to know everything, Elena, so I can fix what has been broken." Elena hesitated, glancing toward the castle windows above them, aware that eyes were likely watching from somewhere within. "It is difficult to explain small things," she said carefully. "None of them alone would seem significant enough to mention. A late meal here, a missed invitation there, a comment meant to sound like concern but landing like an insult. Taken individually, they seem like nothing. Taken together, over months, they become something heavier." "Tell me anyway," he said. "Please." So she did. Carefully, without exaggeration, without the bitterness she might have justifiably felt, Elena described the pattern that had emerged since her wedding day. The late invitations, the cold meals, the seamstress who never quite found time for her requests, the comments from Cassandra, delivered with smiles sharp enough to cut without ever technically breaking any rule of courtesy. Damien listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with every new detail, though he kept his expression carefully controlled, unwilling to frighten her into silence with visible anger. When she finished, a heavy quiet settled between them, broken only by the sound of wind moving through bare branches above. "I am ashamed," Damien said finally, his voice rough, "not just because these things happened, but because I allowed myself to be so consumed by border disputes and treaty negotiations that I never once thought to ask how my own wife was faring within these walls. I assumed that no news meant good news. I was wrong, and that assumption cost you months of unnecessary suffering. You could not have known everything," Elena offered, though her tone lacked full conviction. "You were dealing with matters of the entire pack's safety. That does not excuse neglecting the safety and well-being of the person closest to me," he replied firmly. "A pack is only as strong as its foundation, and a Luna who suffers quietly within her own home, while everyone around her pretends not to notice, is not a foundation. It is a fracture waiting to widen." They continued walking, the conversation slowly shifting from the painful past toward smaller, gentler topics. Elena mentioned, almost shyly, that she had once helped her mother tend a small garden before her death, that she found comfort in growing things, watching seeds become flowers with enough patience and care. Damien listened with genuine interest, asking questions about the specific flowers she remembered, the techniques her mother had taught her, questions that had nothing to do with pack politics or treaty negotiations. By the time they returned indoors, the frost had begun to melt slightly under the afternoon sun, and something between them had shifted as well, however slightly. It was not trust yet, not fully, but it was the beginning of something that had not existed the day before. That evening, Damien called for a private meeting with Beta Callum, closing the study door firmly behind them both. Callum sensed immediately, from his alpha's tight expression, that this would not be a conversation about border patrols or grain shipments. "I need to understand something," Damien said, his tone carefully controlled despite the anger simmering beneath it. "Has my wife been treated poorly within this castle since her arrival? And if so, who has been responsible?" Callum's expression flickered, a brief, involuntary tightening around his eyes that told Damien everything he needed to know before a single word was spoken. Alpha, Callum began carefully. I am not certain I fully understand the extent of what you are asking. Do not insult me by pretending ignorance, Damien said sharply. I have already spoken with Elena. I know invitations were withheld. I know meals were served cold. I know comments were made publicly designed to humiliate rather than welcome her. I want to know who has orchestrated this pattern, and I want the truth, Callum, not a careful evasion designed to protect someone close to you. Callum's shoulders sank slightly, the weight of loyalty warring visibly with the weight of honesty. Cassandra has struggled with the arrangement, Alpha, he admitted finally. She believed, for years, that circumstances might have positioned her differently within this castle. When Elena arrived, that possibility closed permanently, and I believe some of her behavior has stemmed from that disappointment. I did not realize the extent of it until recently, and I regret not addressing it sooner. Damien absorbed this information silently, anger and disappointment mixing uncomfortably within him. Callum had been his beta and trusted friend for years, and learning that his friend's own household had contributed, whether through action or inaction, to Elena's suffering, felt like a betrayal layered on top of his own guilt. This cannot continue, Damien said finally. Whatever disappointment Cassandra has carried, it does not justify deliberate cruelty toward my wife within her own home. I expect this addressed immediately, Callum, and I expect your full cooperation in ensuring it never happens again. Callum nodded, understanding clearly that this was not merely a request but an expectation, carrying the full weight of his Alpha's authority. Understood, Alpha, he said quietly. It will be addressed. Meanwhile, in a quieter corner of the castle, Mira found Elena sitting near a window overlooking the gardens where she had walked with Damien earlier that day. The younger girl settled beside her without invitation, the casual familiarity of someone who had already decided, somewhere in the past weeks, that Elena deserved genuine friendship rather than cautious distance. You look different today, Mira observed, studying Elena's expression carefully. Lighter, somehow. Elena smiled, a small, genuine expression, rather than the practiced courtesy she had perfected over recent months. Your brother surprised me today, she admitted. I am not yet certain what to make of it, but it was a welcome surprise. Mira nodded thoughtfully. He can be difficult to reach sometimes, she said. Buried so deeply in duty that he forgets the people standing right beside him need attention too. But when he finally does notice something, he does not do things halfway. I hope you are right, Elena said quietly, watching the last of the afternoon light fade beyond the garden walls, uncertain whether to feel hopeful or simply cautious, but grateful, regardless, for the small kindness of not feeling entirely alone within these walls for the first time in longer than she cared to admit. As night fell over the castle, Cassandra sat alone in her private quarters, Callum's earlier conversation replaying uncomfortably in her mind. She had not expected consequences to arrive so swiftly, had assumed, perhaps foolishly, that her subtle methods would remain forever undetected beneath the surface of ordinary castle routine. Now, faced with the possibility of exposure and consequence, she began quietly calculating how far she might need to go to protect herself from whatever reckoning was clearly approaching. Whatever happened next, Cassandra decided, she would not surrender her position within this castle without resistance, regardless of what discomfort that resistance might eventually cause for anyone standing in her way. 3 days passed before the first visible sign of change appeared throughout the castle, and it arrived not as a quiet adjustment, but as a public declaration that left no room for misinterpretation. Damien called a gathering of the household staff and senior pack members in the Great Hall, an event unusual enough on its own that whispers had already begun circulating before anyone understood its purpose. Elena stood beside him at the front of the hall, her hands clasped carefully in front of her, uncertain what to expect despite Damien having told her privately, that morning, that he intended to address the matter openly, rather than allow rumors to distort the truth further. I called you here today, Damien began, his voice carrying easily across the hall, because I have recently become aware of failures within this household that I cannot allow to continue unaddressed. My wife Elena has endured months of neglect and quiet cruelty within these walls, cruelty that occurred beneath my own roof, while I remained too consumed by other duties to notice. That failure belongs to me as much as to anyone else who allowed it to continue. A ripple of uncomfortable murmurs passed through the assembled crowd, staff members exchanging uncertain glances, uncertain whether they themselves might be implicated in whatever consequences followed this declaration. Elena is my Luna, Damien continued firmly. Not a formality fulfilled by treaty, not an outsider tolerated for political convenience, but the woman standing beside me, as an equal partner, in leading this pack forward. Any further disrespect directed toward her, whether through action or deliberate neglect, will be treated as disrespect directed toward me personally, and will carry appropriate consequences. His eyes moved deliberately toward Cassandra, standing near the front of the gathered crowd beside Callum, her expression carefully neutral despite the tension visible in her rigid posture. Effective immediately, Damien continued, Cassandra will no longer hold authority over household staffing decisions or scheduling arrangements. Those responsibilities will transfer to Elena directly, as befits her position within this household. The murmurs grew louder before quieting under Damien's steady gaze. Cassandra's face remained composed, though a muscle twitched slightly along her jaw, the only visible crack in an otherwise carefully maintained mask of indifference. After the gathering dispersed, Elena found herself surrounded by staff members, offering awkward, uncertain apologies, some clearly genuine, others delivered with the transparent self-preservation of people eager to distance themselves from whatever consequences might follow Cassandra's diminished standing. Elena accepted each apology graciously, though privately she felt an unfamiliar unease settling in her chest, uncertain how to navigate authority she had never expected to hold. That evening, alone in the study with Damien, she voiced this uncertainty honestly. I do not know if I am prepared for this responsibility, she admitted, managing household staff, resolving disputes among people who have spent months treating me as beneath their notice. It feels overwhelming. You will not manage it alone, Damien assured her, settling into the chair beside her rather than across from her, a small shift in positioning that felt significant given the distance that had defined their relationship until recently. I should have included you in these decisions from the beginning, Elena. That failure was mine, and I intend to correct it moving forward, not simply by granting you authority, but by actually standing beside you as you learn to use it. Elena studied his expression carefully, searching for any sign of the distant indifference that had characterized their early marriage, finding instead something that looked remarkably like genuine commitment. It will take time, she said quietly, for me to trust that this change is permanent rather than temporary guilt that fades once the initial shock wears away. That is fair, Damien acknowledged. I do not expect trust to be restored immediately, nor do I believe I have earned it yet through words alone. I intend to earn it through actions, consistently, for as long as it takes. Over the following days, Damien began adjusting his schedule in ways that surprised the entire castle, delegating certain border negotiations to trusted advisors so he could join Elena for meals consistently, rather than sporadically, asking after her opinions on household matters that had previously been decided entirely without her input, and making a visible effort to include her in gatherings and discussions from which she had previously been excluded. The seamstress, perhaps sensing the shifting winds within the castle, suddenly found ample time to address Elena's wardrobe needs, producing new dresses within days that would previously have taken months to complete. Meals arrived promptly and warm. Invitations to gatherings arrived with appropriate notice, rather than as afterthoughts. Yet beneath this surface improvement, tension continued building elsewhere. Cassandra, stripped of her previous authority and publicly humiliated before the entire household, grew increasingly desperate to reclaim some measure of the influence she had lost. She began meeting privately with a small group of staff members who remained loyal to her, individuals who had benefited from her previous authority and resented Elena's sudden elevation within the household hierarchy. I refused to simply disappear quietly because some foolish girl finally caught the alpha's attention, Cassandra told her closest confidant, a senior maid named Bridget who had served the castle for over a decade and harbored her own resentments toward changes she viewed as disruptive to established order. There must be some way to remind everyone, including Damien himself, that Elena remains unsuited for the position she now claims to occupy. Bridget nodded slowly, though uncertainty flickered across her weathered features. What do you propose, exactly? She asked carefully. Cassandra's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Elena remains unfamiliar with many of this pack's traditions and expectations, she said. If she were to make a significant error during an important gathering, particularly one involving outside dignitaries, it would raise serious questions about her suitability for the position she now holds. Questions that even Damien's newfound devotion could not entirely silence. Meanwhile, unaware of the quiet conspiracy forming against her, Elena continued adjusting cautiously to her expanded responsibilities within the household. Mira remained a steady source of support during this transition, offering practical guidance about pack traditions and expectations that Elena had never been properly taught, filling gaps in her knowledge that Cassandra had deliberately allowed to remain unfilled during the earlier months of her marriage. "There is a formal gathering approaching soon," Mira mentioned one afternoon as the two women walked together through the castle gardens, now beginning to show early signs of the coming spring. Representatives from several allied territories will attend, including delegates from Garrick's people, given the tentative peace discussions currently underway. It will be your first significant appearance as Luna since everything changed, and people will be watching closely. Elena felt a familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach at this information. "I do not yet know all the traditions expected during such gatherings," she admitted. "I worry about making an error that reflects poorly on Damien, or on the pack as a whole." Mira squeezed her hand reassuringly. "I will help you prepare," she promised, "and Damien will be beside you throughout the entire gathering. You are not facing this alone, Elena, regardless of what anyone else within this castle might hope to convince you otherwise." That evening, Damien found Elena reviewing notes Mira had prepared about proper greetings, seating arrangements, and diplomatic protocols expected during the upcoming gathering. He settled beside her without hesitation, reviewing the material alongside her, offering context and clarification where needed, his presence steady and reassuring, in a way that felt increasingly natural rather than surprising. "You will do wonderfully," he said finally, closing the notes gently and turning to face her directly. "And even if some small error occurs, it will not diminish your worth or your position within this pack. I will not allow anyone to suggest otherwise, regardless of what motivations might drive such suggestions." Elena smiled, genuine warmth spreading through her chest at his words, though a small, cautious part of her mind remained aware that not everyone within these castle walls shared her husband's newfound commitment to her well-being. Somewhere within these same walls, plans were already forming that would test exactly how strong that commitment truly was. The gathering arrived on a cold, clear evening, torches lining the entrance to the Great Hall, as carriages bearing delegates from allied territories began arriving one after another. Elena stood beside Damien at the top of the stone steps, wearing a new gown the seamstress had finished only hours earlier, deep blue fabric that caught the torchlight in a way that made her look every bit the Luna she was still learning to become. "You look magnificent," Damien murmured as the first carriages approached, and Elena felt a small flush of warmth spread through her chest, despite the anxiety twisting in her stomach. Delegates from 3 allied territories arrived first, greeted warmly by Damien, and, with careful attention to the protocols Mira had taught her, by Elena as well. She remembered names correctly, offered appropriate greetings in the proper order of precedence, and gradually felt her confidence building with each successful exchange. Then the delegation from Garrick's territory arrived, led by a tall, weathered man named Alpha Garrick himself, whose presence carried the particular tension of a former enemy, now cautiously exploring peace. Elena had been warned about the delicate nature of these negotiations, warned that any misstep during this gathering could unravel months of careful diplomatic progress. "Alpha Garrick," Damien said formally, extending a hand in greeting. "Welcome to my home. I trust your journey was comfortable." Garrick's expression remained carefully neutral as he accepted the greeting, his eyes flicking briefly toward Elena with an assessing quality that made her stomach tighten further. "And this must be your new Luna," Garrick said, his tone giving away nothing of his true opinion. "I have heard interesting things about your household in recent months." Elena felt her pulse quicken at the implication buried within his carefully neutral words, uncertain exactly what rumors had traveled beyond the castle walls regarding her earlier treatment. She offered a composed greeting regardless, drawing on every lesson Mira had patiently taught her over recent days. "It is an honor to welcome you to our home, Alpha Garrick," she said smoothly. "I hope this evening marks another step toward lasting peace between our territories." Something in Garrick's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of what might have been reluctant approval, though his overall demeanor remained guarded as the group moved inside toward the great hall where dinner awaited. Throughout the meal, Elena remained acutely aware of eyes watching her every movement, some curious, some skeptical, a few openly hostile. Cassandra sat near the far end of the long table, her expression carefully composed, though Elena caught her watching with unusual intensity throughout the evening, as though waiting for some anticipated failure that had not yet arrived. The tension finally surfaced during a formal toast, when tradition required the Luna to offer words honoring both households present, a custom Elena had practiced extensively with Mira over recent days. She rose from her seat as the appropriate moment arrived, lifting her goblet carefully, and began the traditional words exactly as she had rehearsed them. Partway through the toast, however, a servant approached the table with a fresh course, and in passing close beside Elena, seemingly by accident, jostled her arm just enough to spill a small amount of wine across the pristine white tablecloth, directly in front of several Garrick delegates. A collective, uncomfortable silence fell across the hall. Elena felt her face flush with embarrassment, painfully aware of Cassandra's expression across the room, an expression that, for just a moment before catching herself, held something dangerously close to satisfaction. Elena's mind raced, aware that this moment, however small, would be remembered and discussed, particularly among delegates already watching her closely for signs of unsuitability. But rather than dissolving into flustered apology, she drew a steady breath and continued, with remarkable composure, exactly where she had left off in her toast. "Even the smallest stains upon fine fabric can be cleaned away with patience and care," she said smoothly, glancing briefly at the spilled wine, before returning her attention to the assembled guests. "Much as small conflicts between our territories, however deeply set, can be resolved through patience and genuine effort. I offer this toast not merely to celebrate what already exists between us, but to honor what we might yet build together, stain and all." A moment of surprised silence followed before Alpha Garrick, unexpectedly, began to chuckle, followed by scattered laughter throughout the hall, tension breaking visibly, as guests recognized both the cleverness of her recovery and the genuine sentiment behind her words. Damien, watching from beside her, felt something close to pride swell within his chest, along with profound relief that the moment had resolved itself so gracefully. "Well spoken," Garrick said, raising his own goblet in response. "Perhaps this alliance carries more promise than I initially assumed." Later that evening, once the delegates had retired to their prepared quarters and the great hall had emptied of guests, Damien pulled Elena aside privately, his expression a mixture of relief and genuine admiration. "That was remarkable," he said quietly. "I do not know many people who could have recovered so gracefully from such a moment, particularly with such important guests watching so closely." Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile, the adrenaline of the evening finally beginning to fade. "I nearly panicked entirely," she admitted honestly. "But I remembered what you said before the gathering began, that even small errors would not diminish my worth in your eyes. That thought helped me find my footing again." Damien studied her for a long moment, something warm and unfamiliar settling behind his eyes. "I meant every word," he said quietly. "And I am beginning to realize, Elena, that you possess strengths I failed to notice during the earlier months of our marriage, strengths this pact desperately needs moving forward." Elena felt her cheeks warm at his words, though a small, cautious part of her mind remained aware of the incident itself, wondering whether the servant's apparent accident had truly been accidental at all. She said nothing of this suspicion to Damien that evening, unwilling to cast unfounded accusations without clear evidence. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and she found herself watching Cassandra more carefully in the days that followed. Her suspicions were not unfounded. In the servants' quarters later that same night, Cassandra met privately with the young maid who had served as the wine-bearer during dinner, a nervous girl named Fiona who had been promised favor and protection by Cassandra in exchange for creating just enough disruption to embarrass Elena during the gathering. "That did not go as we hoped," Cassandra said tersely, her earlier composure cracking slightly now that they were alone. She recovered too quickly, too gracefully. Garrick seemed almost charmed by her response rather than doubtful of her suitability. Fiona shifted uncomfortably, clearly uneasy with the entire arrangement. "I did exactly as you instructed," she said quietly. "I cannot control how she chose to respond afterward." "No," Cassandra agreed slowly, her mind already turning toward other possibilities, other opportunities, that might yet arise to undermine the growing confidence Elena seemed to be building within the household and beyond it. "But we will find another way. This is far from finished." Elena, unaware of the full scope of the conspiracy still forming against her, but increasingly wary of Cassandra's continued presence within the household, resolved quietly to remain vigilant moving forward, understanding instinctively that whatever progress she had made that evening, genuine security within her new home remained, for now, still frustratingly out of reach. Spring arrived slowly over the following weeks, the castle gardens shifting from frost-covered stillness into gentle color, and with it came a fragile sense of normalcy that Elena had not experienced since her wedding day. Damien continued honoring the commitments he had made, joining her consistently for meals, seeking her opinion on household matters, and gradually rebuilding a foundation of trust that had once seemed impossible. Yet Cassandra's presence within the castle remained a persistent undercurrent of tension, despite her diminished authority. She continued attending gatherings, continued maintaining her position as Callum's wife, and continued, quietly and carefully, searching for opportunities to undermine Elena's growing standing within the household. The next opportunity arrived unexpectedly, in the form of a message from Elena's father, delivered by a tired messenger who had traveled several days to reach the Voss castle. Elena read the letter privately in her chambers, her hands trembling slightly as she absorbed its contents. Her father wrote that trade disputes along the Ashwood border had escalated into something more serious, skirmishes breaking out between Ashwood hunters and neighboring territories, threatening the very alliance her marriage had been arranged to secure. He requested, urgently, that Elena use whatever influence she now held within the Voss household to encourage Damien's direct intervention in resolving the matter before it escalated further. Elena brought the letter to Damien that evening, uncertain how he would receive a request that essentially asked him to prioritize Ashwood's troubles above his own pack's more immediate concerns. "This is a delicate situation," Damien said slowly, reading through the letter twice before setting it aside. "Ashwood's stability directly affects our alliance, and by extension, our own pack's security. But committing significant resources to resolve a dispute along their border, particularly while tensions with Garrick's territory remain only cautiously improved, carries genuine risk. I understand the difficulty this places you in," Elena said carefully. "I do not ask you to act recklessly on my father's behalf. I only wished you to be aware of the situation, so that whatever decision you make can be an informed one." Damien studied her expression for a long moment, clearly weighing something beyond the immediate political calculation. "I will send a delegation to assess the situation directly," he decided finally. "Not a full commitment of resources, not yet, but enough presence to demonstrate our alliance remains meaningful, and enough information to determine what further action might be warranted." Elena felt genuine relief at his measured response, grateful that he had neither dismissed her father's concerns entirely, nor rushed into a decision that might destabilize his own pack's more pressing priorities. "Thank you," she said quietly. "That seems like a wise balance. I want your opinion on who should lead this delegation," Damien added, surprising her further. "You understand your father's territory and its particular sensitivities better than anyone within my own council. Who would you trust to represent our interests fairly, while also respecting Ashwood's concerns?" Elena considered the question seriously, eventually suggesting a name, a trusted advisor she had known since childhood, someone she believed would navigate the delicate negotiations with appropriate care. Damien listened carefully, ultimately agreeing to her suggestion, a decision that would have seemed unthinkable during the earlier months of their marriage, when Elena's opinions on pack matters had never once been solicited. News of this decision spread through the castle quickly, and not everyone received it favorably. Several senior advisors, accustomed to Damien making such decisions entirely without outside input, particularly not input from his previously overlooked wife, began quietly voicing concerns among themselves about the growing influence Elena seemed to be accumulating within pack affairs. Cassandra, sensing an opportunity within this discontent, began cultivating these concerns carefully, framing conversations in ways designed to plant doubt about Elena's suitability for such influence, without ever directly criticizing Damien's own judgment in granting it. "It is simply unusual," she remarked to a small gathering of senior staff and advisors one afternoon, choosing her words with practiced care, "for someone so new to our traditions and our particular political landscape to be granted such significant influence over delegation decisions affecting matters as sensitive as border disputes. I mean no disrespect toward Elena personally, of course. I only wonder whether such rapid elevation serves the pack's genuine interests, or merely reflects Damien's understandable guilt over earlier oversights." The comment, delivered with careful diplomatic phrasing, found receptive ears among advisors already uncertain about the sudden shift in household dynamics. Whispers began circulating, subtle enough that Damien remained unaware of their full extent, but persistent enough that Elena began noticing occasional cool receptions from advisors who had previously, at minimum, treated her with polite indifference rather than veiled skepticism. Mira noticed this shift as well, bringing her concerns to Elena directly one afternoon, while the two women walked together through the blossoming garden paths. "There are whispers among some of the senior advisors," Mira said carefully, questioning whether your involvement in matters like the Ashwood delegation reflects sound judgment or simply Damien's guilt clouding his usual careful decision-making. "I do not believe these whispers myself, but I thought you should be aware of them." Elena absorbed this information with a heavy heart, recognizing the familiar shape of Cassandra's careful maneuvering even without direct proof of her involvement. "I suspected something like this might emerge," she admitted. "Change rarely occurs without resistance, particularly change that shifts established patterns of influence within a household as complex as this one." "What will you do?" Mira asked. Elena considered the question seriously before answering. "I will continue demonstrating, through consistent action rather than defensive words, that Damien's trust in my judgment is not misplaced," she said finally. "Whispers fade eventually, when they are not fed by genuine failures. I simply need to ensure those failures do not occur, regardless of how carefully certain individuals within this castle might hope to manufacture opportunities for them." That evening, Elena approached the delegation preparations with renewed determination, reviewing every detail personally, consulting with Damien's most trusted advisors to ensure the chosen representative understood not only Ashwood's particular concerns, but also the delicate balance required to avoid provoking further tension with Garrick's territory, still only cautiously exploring peace after years of conflict. Her thoroughness did not go unnoticed. Several advisors who had initially harbored skepticism about her involvement found themselves gradually impressed by the careful attention she brought to matters extending well beyond simple household management, matters touching directly on pact diplomacy and border security. Damien, observing this transformation with quiet pride, found himself increasingly grateful for the partnership Elena had begun offering him, a partnership entirely absent during the earlier months of their marriage, when he had viewed her, unfairly, as merely a political formality, rather than a genuine asset to his leadership. "You continue surprising me," he told her one evening, as they reviewed the delegation's final preparations together in his private study. "I did not expect, when this marriage was first arranged, that I would find in you not merely a dutiful wife, but a genuine partner, capable of navigating complex political matters with such careful skill." Elena smiled, though a shadow of caution remained behind her expression. "I am grateful you see it that way," she said quietly. "Not everyone within this castle shares your perspective, I fear." Damien's expression sobered slightly at this acknowledgement. "I have heard some of the whispers as well," he admitted. "I did not realize how persistent they had become until recently. I want you to know, Elena, that regardless of what doubts certain advisors might harbor, my trust in your judgment remains unwavering. I will not allow quiet resistance to undermine the partnership we have begun building together." His words offered genuine comfort, though Elena remained aware that words alone, however sincere, would not entirely silence the careful maneuvering happening beneath the surface of castle life. Somewhere within these walls, Cassandra continued watching, waiting, searching for the next opportunity to prove that Elena's rise within the household carried consequences neither she nor Damien had yet fully anticipated. The delegation returned from Ashwood territory within 2 weeks, bringing news that the border skirmishes had calmed considerably, following the Vospak's visible show of alliance, a diplomatic success that further strengthened Elena's standing among advisors who had initially doubted her involvement in such matters. Yet the relief this news brought proved short-lived, overshadowed almost immediately by a far more troubling development. A messenger arrived one morning bearing word that Garrick's territory had received disturbing reports suggesting the Vospak intended to use the Ashwood alliance as justification for eventually expanding influence into contested border regions long claimed by Garrick's people, a rumor that, if believed, threatened to unravel months of carefully rebuilt trust between the two territories. Damien summoned his senior advisors immediately upon receiving this news, his expression tight with barely controlled frustration. Where would such a rumor originate? He demanded. pacing the length of his study while advisors exchanged uncertain glances. We have made no such plans, nor discussed any intention of expanding beyond our current borders. Someone within our own household must have spoken carelessly, or deliberately, suggested one advisor cautiously, careful not to accuse anyone directly without evidence. Elena, present during this discussion at Damien's insistence despite some advisors' visible discomfort with her involvement in matters of such delicate diplomacy, felt a cold suspicion settling in her stomach, though she said nothing immediately, unwilling to level accusations without proof. That evening, however, she brought her concerns privately to Mira, the two women meeting quietly in Elena's chambers, away from the castle's more public spaces. "I believe Cassandra may be involved in this rumor somehow," Elena admitted carefully. "I have no direct proof, only suspicion born from her earlier attempts to undermine my standing within this household. But the timing feels significant, appearing shortly after the delegation's successful return, shortly after several advisors began speaking more favorably of my involvement in pack matters." Mira considered this carefully before responding. "If she is involved, we will need actual evidence before bringing accusations to Damien," she said. "He respects Callum deeply, and accusing Cassandra without proof risks damaging that friendship unnecessarily, particularly if we are wrong." "I understand," Elena agreed, "but I fear that waiting for proof may allow further damage to occur in the meantime. This rumor, if left unaddressed, could unravel the peace we have worked so carefully to build with Garrick's territory." The two women decided, cautiously, to investigate the matter themselves, before bringing anything to Damien's attention, aware that a false accusation could prove as damaging as the rumor itself. Mira, using her position within the household to move about with relative freedom, began quietly observing Cassandra's movements and conversations over the following days, while Elena focused on tracing the rumor's origin through more official diplomatic channels. Their combined efforts eventually uncovered a troubling pattern. A merchant who regularly traveled between Voss territory and Garrick's lands had recently been overheard in a tavern along the border road, repeating claims about Voss expansion plans that closely mirrored the rumor now circulating within Garrick's court. When questioned discreetly by one of Damien's trusted scouts, the merchant admitted, reluctantly, that he had heard these claims from a castle servant during a recent visit to purchase supplies. A servant he identified, after careful questioning, as Bridget, the same senior maid who had served as Cassandra's closest confidant throughout the earlier scheming against Elena. Armed with this information, Elena and Mira brought their findings to Damien together, presenting the evidence carefully and without exaggeration, allowing the facts themselves to speak, rather than relying on accusation alone. Damien listened in tense silence as they laid out the connection between Bridget, Cassandra, and the damaging rumor now threatening months of careful diplomatic progress. His expression darkened progressively throughout their explanation, anger building visibly beneath his controlled exterior. "This goes beyond household politics," he said finally, his voice low and dangerous. "This threatens the security and stability of this entire pack, endangering peace negotiations that required years of careful effort to establish. If Cassandra is truly responsible for spreading such damaging falsehoods, deliberately, to undermine Elena's standing regardless of the broader consequences for our pack's safety, this cannot be treated as a simple matter of household rivalry any longer." He called Callum to his study immediately, the beta arriving with visible uncertainty, clearly sensing from the summons that whatever awaited him would not be a comfortable conversation. "Callum," Damien began, his tone carefully controlled despite the anger simmering beneath it, "I need to know the truth, immediately and completely, about your wife's recent activities regarding rumors currently circulating within Garrick's territory, concerning our pack's supposed expansion intentions." Callum's face paled visibly as Damien explained the evidence uncovered by Elena and Mira, the connection between Bridget's careless words to a traveling merchant and the damaging rumor now threatening the alliance both packs had worked so carefully to build. By the time Damien finished speaking, Callum's expression had shifted from confused uncertainty to something closer to genuine alarm. "I did not know the extent of this," Callum admitted quietly. "I knew Cassandra harbored resentment regarding Elena's rising standing within the household, but I believed her frustration remained limited to matters of household influence, nothing approaching interference in matters of pact diplomacy and border security. If she is truly responsible for this rumor, The consequences extend far beyond anything I anticipated when I chose not to more forcefully address her earlier behavior. Bring her to me, Damien said firmly. I need to hear this directly from her, and I need this matter resolved before it causes irreparable damage to our standing with Garrick's territory. Callum departed reluctantly, returning within the hour with Cassandra beside him, her expression carefully composed, despite the visible tension in her shoulders, as she entered Damien's study and found Elena and Mira present alongside her husband and the Alpha King himself. I understand there are concerns regarding recent events, Cassandra began carefully, clearly attempting to control the conversation's direction before accusations could be leveled directly against her. Do not insult my intelligence with careful evasions, Damien interrupted sharply. I know that Bridget, your closest confidant within this household, spoke carelessly to a traveling merchant regarding supposed Voss expansion plans into Garrick's contested territories, claims that have now created a serious diplomatic crisis, threatening months of careful peace negotiations. I want to know whether you instructed her to spread these claims deliberately, and I want the complete truth, immediately. Cassandra's composed expression finally cracked, a flash of genuine fear passing across her features before she attempted, unsuccessfully, to regain her earlier control. I never intended for matters to escalate this seriously, she said quietly, her voice losing its earlier careful confidence. I only wish to remind certain advisors that Elena's influence within pack matters carried genuine risks, given her limited experience with our particular diplomatic sensitivities. I did not anticipate that Bridget would speak so carelessly to an outside merchant, nor did I anticipate the rumor spreading so far beyond our own borders. So you admit to deliberately spreading falsehoods, designed to undermine Elena's standing, Damien said, his voice cold with barely controlled fury, regardless of the genuine risk this posed to our pack's security, and our carefully rebuilt alliance with Garrick's territory. Cassandra said nothing further, her silence itself serving as confirmation of everything Damien had already suspected. The room fell into heavy silence, broken only by the sound of Callum's unsteady breathing beside his wife, clearly grappling with the full weight of what her actions had truly cost, not merely to Elena personally, but to the entire pack's security and standing among its allies. The days following Cassandra's confession brought a flurry of urgent diplomatic activity, as Damien worked quickly to contain the damage before the false rumor could further poison relations with Garrick's territory. He dispatched a personal envoy carrying a detailed explanation of the rumor's true origin, along with renewed assurances that the Voss pack held no intention of expanding into contested border regions, a message crafted carefully with Elena's direct input, given her understanding of the diplomatic sensitivities involved. Elena spent long hours during this period working alongside Damien's senior advisors, reviewing every detail of the response before it was sent, aware that any remaining ambiguity might further damage the fragile trust both territories had worked so carefully to rebuild. Her contributions during this crisis proved invaluable, several advisors later admitting privately that her careful attention to diplomatic nuance had likely prevented a far more serious breakdown in relations. Alpha Garrick's response, when it finally arrived nearly a week later, carried cautious acceptance of the explanation provided, along with a pointed observation that internal household conflicts within the Voss pack should not be permitted to threaten matters of such broader importance in the future. The message stung, though Damien acknowledged privately that the criticism, however uncomfortable, was entirely fair given the circumstances. This cannot happen again, Damien told Elena one evening, exhaustion evident in his voice after days of careful diplomatic maneuvering to repair the damage. Whatever internal tensions exist within this household, they cannot be permitted to threaten our pack's broader security and standing among our allies. Cassandra's actions, whatever her personal grievances, crossed a line that endangers everyone within this territory, not merely the two of us. What will happen to her? Elena asked, genuinely uncertain what consequence would prove appropriate for actions that had caused such significant diplomatic damage, however unintentional the broader consequences might have initially seemed to Cassandra herself. Damien considered the question seriously before answering. I have discussed the matter extensively with Callum, he said. Cassandra will be stripped entirely of any remaining position or influence within this household, and she will be required to formally apologize before the assembled pack for her role in creating this crisis. Beyond that, Callum has requested that she be permitted to remain within the territory, rather than face exile, given their long marriage, and his own genuine remorse over not addressing her behavior more forcefully earlier. I have agreed to this request, though I made clear that any further interference in matters of pact diplomacy or continued cruelty toward you personally will result in far more severe consequences, without exception. Elena absorbed this decision thoughtfully, understanding the delicate balance Damien had attempted to strike between appropriate consequence and preserving relationships that had endured for years within his own inner circle. I think that seems fair, she said finally. I do not wish to see Callum's marriage destroyed entirely over Cassandra's actions, particularly given his own genuine efforts to address the situation once he understood its full scope. The formal apology occurred several days later, before the assembled pack in the same great hall where Damien had first publicly declared Elena's rightful standing as Luna months earlier. Cassandra stood before the gathered crowd, her earlier composed confidence entirely absent, replaced by genuine, visible humility, as she acknowledged the harm her actions had caused, both to Elena personally and to the pack's broader security and diplomatic standing. I allowed personal resentment to cloud my judgment in ways that endangered this entire pack's safety, Cassandra said, her voice unsteady, but clear enough to carry across the silent hall. I owe Elena a genuine apology, not merely for the rumor that threatened our alliance with Garrick's territory, but for months of quiet cruelty that I directed toward her since her arrival in this household, cruelty born from my own disappointment, rather than anything Elena herself had done to deserve such treatment. She turned to face Elena directly, something genuine flickering behind her carefully controlled expression. I am sorry, Cassandra said quietly, truly sorry, for everything I have done to make your time within this household more difficult than it needed to be. Elena studied her for a long moment before responding, aware that the entire assembled pack watched closely to see how she would receive this apology. I accept your apology, she said finally, her voice steady and clear. I hope that moving forward, we might find a way to coexist within this household without the tension that has defined our relationship until now. I bear no desire for continued conflict, only for peace within my own home. The gathering dispersed slowly afterward, quiet conversations rippling through the crowd regarding the dramatic events of recent weeks. Mira found Elena shortly after, offering a warm embrace that had become increasingly natural between the two women over recent months. You handled that with remarkable grace, Mira said quietly. I am not certain I could have offered such genuine forgiveness after everything Cassandra put you through. Elena considered this thoughtfully before responding. I do not know if I have fully forgiven her yet, she admitted honestly. But I understand that continued resentment would only poison this household further, and I have had enough of feeling poisoned by tension within these walls. I would rather build something better moving forward than remain trapped by grievances from the past, however legitimate those grievances might be. That evening, alone with Damien in their private chambers, Elena finally allowed herself to fully process the exhausting events of recent weeks, the crisis with Garrick's territory, Cassandra's confession and public apology, the careful diplomatic work required to repair relationships nearly destroyed by a single rumor born from personal resentment. I am proud of how you handled everything, Damien said quietly, settling beside her rather than across from her, a habit that had become entirely natural between them in recent months. Your composure during the diplomatic crisis, your grace during Cassandra's apology today. I do not believe I fully appreciated, when we first married, exactly what strength you carried within you. Elena smiled tiredly, genuine warmth spreading through her chest at his words. I did not fully appreciate it myself, she admitted. Months of feeling invisible within this household made me doubt my own worth, far more than I realized, until circumstances forced me to prove otherwise. Damien reached for her hand gently, an increasingly familiar gesture that no longer felt hesitant or uncertain between them. That will never happen again, he said firmly. I promise you that, Elena. Not merely in words but in continued action, for as long as we remain bound together as partners leading this pack forward. Elena leaned against him slightly, allowing herself, for the first time in longer than she could remember, to feel genuinely secure within the walls that had once felt so cold and unwelcoming. Whatever challenges still awaited them, whatever remaining tensions lingered within the household following Cassandra's exposure, Elena felt, for the first time since her wedding day, that she was no longer navigating them entirely alone. With Cassandra's influence finally neutralized and the diplomatic crisis with Garrick's territory carefully resolved, the castle settled into a rhythm unlike anything Elena had experienced since her arrival months earlier. Staff members who had once treated her with careful indifference now approached her directly with questions and concerns, recognizing her genuine authority within the household, rather than merely tolerating a title granted through marriage alone. Yet Damien understood that rebuilding trust required more than simply removing the source of earlier cruelty. Genuine healing demanded consistent, deliberate effort extended across every aspect of their shared life, and he approached this responsibility with the same determined focus he had once reserved exclusively for matters of pack security and diplomacy. He began by formally establishing Elena's role within pack governance, not merely as an advisor consulted occasionally on matters of personal interest, but as a genuine partner in leadership decisions affecting the entire territory. Senior advisors, having witnessed her careful handling of the Ashwood delegation and the Garrick diplomatic crisis, no longer questioned her presence during important discussions, understanding now that her insights carried genuine value, rather than representing simply Damien's personal indulgence. "I want to formalize something," Damien told her one afternoon, as they walked together through gardens, now fully blooming with the arrival of late spring. "I have spoken with the pack elders, and we have agreed that moving forward, significant decisions affecting this territory will require both our signatures, not merely mine alone. You are my equal partner in leading this pack, Elena, and I want that partnership reflected formally, not merely understood informally between the two of us." Elena felt a swell of genuine emotion at this declaration, recognizing the significance of what Damien offered, a formal acknowledgement of authority that extended far beyond anything she had imagined possible during those earlier lonely months, when she had felt herself fading into invisible irrelevance within these same walls. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying genuine gratitude. "I do not take this responsibility lightly, Damien. I intend to honor the trust you are placing in me, both through careful judgment and continued dedication to this pack's well-being." "I know you will," he replied, squeezing her hand gently. "You have already proven that beyond any reasonable doubt." Beyond formal governance matters, Damien also worked deliberately to rebuild the personal connection between them that had been entirely absent during the early months of their marriage. He began setting aside dedicated time each week, regardless of pressing pack matters, simply to spend time with Elena, away from formal duties and household responsibilities. Walks through the gardens, quiet evenings reading together in the study, conversations that had nothing to do with treaties or border disputes, and everything to do with simply understanding each other as individuals, rather than merely as political partners bound by arranged circumstance. During one such evening, Elena finally shared with Damien the small wooden box she had kept hidden beneath her bed since her wedding day, containing the letters she had written to her deceased mother during those earlier, lonelier months. She had never intended to show anyone these private reflections, but something about the trust they had rebuilt together made her want Damien to fully understand the depth of what she had endured before he finally noticed her suffering. Damien read several of the letters in respectful silence, his expression growing increasingly somber as he absorbed the raw honesty of her earlier loneliness. Words she had never spoken aloud to anyone, confined instead to pages meant only for a mother who could no longer read them. "I am so sorry," he said finally, his voice thick with genuine emotion, as he set the letters aside carefully. "I cannot undo the months you spent feeling this alone, Elena, but I promise you that I understand now, more fully than I ever have before, exactly what my earlier neglect cost you." Elena reached for his hand, grateful tears gathering in her eyes, though they no longer carried the bitter loneliness that had defined her earlier tears within these same walls. "You do not need to carry guilt over the past forever," she said gently. "What matters now is what we build moving forward, together, and I believe, genuinely, that we are building something worth having." Their relationship continued deepening over the following weeks, the careful partnership they had built through crisis, gradually evolving into something warmer, something that increasingly resembled genuine affection, rather than merely dutiful cooperation. Damien found himself seeking Elena's company not merely for her valuable insights on pack matters, but simply because her presence brought him genuine comfort and joy, a realization that surprised him given how differently their marriage had begun. Mira, observing this transformation with quiet satisfaction, remarked one afternoon to Elena that she had never seen her brother quite so genuinely content, nor quite so attentive to another person's well-being, throughout the years she had known him. "He carries so much responsibility," Mira said thoughtfully. as the two women sat together in the garden, watching afternoon light filter through blossoming trees. I think he forgot, for a long time, that leadership does not require sacrificing genuine connection with the people closest to him. You have reminded him of that, Elena, in ways I do not believe anyone else within this pack could have managed. Elena smiled, genuine warmth spreading through her chest at these words. I think we have reminded each other of quite a lot, she said quietly. I had forgotten, during those lonely early months, that I possessed strength worth recognizing. Damien helped me remember that, once he finally saw me clearly. As summer approached, bringing with it preparations for an important seasonal gathering that would bring together representatives from every allied territory within the region, Elena found herself approaching the upcoming responsibilities with genuine confidence, rather than the anxious uncertainty that had defined her earlier attempts at formal diplomacy. She had proven herself capable, both to the pack and to herself, and that hard-won confidence now informed every aspect of her expanding role within the household and beyond it. Cassandra, meanwhile, having lost her earlier influence but retained her position within the household through Callum's continued marriage, gradually settled into a quieter, more subdued presence within castle life. She offered no further interference, whether from genuine remorse or simple recognition that further conflict would only invite consequences far more severe than what she had already faced. Elena, true to her earlier words, extended cautious civility toward her whenever their paths crossed. Neither warm friendship nor continued hostility, but a careful peace that allowed the household to function without the constant undercurrent of tension that had defined its earlier months. The castle that had once felt so cold and unwelcoming to Elena had gradually transformed into something resembling genuine home, not through the erasure of past difficulties, but through the deliberate, consistent work both she and Damien had invested in building something better than what had existed before. The seasonal gathering arrived on a warm summer evening, drawing representatives from every allied territory within the region, including a delegation from Garrick's lands led once again by Alpha Garrick himself, whose earlier cautious skepticism toward Elena had, over recent months of careful diplomatic exchange, gradually softened into something approaching genuine respect. This gathering carried far greater significance than the earlier dinner, where Elena had first navigated formal diplomacy as Luna. This event marked a formal renewal of alliances across the entire region, an opportunity for Damien to demonstrate not merely his own continued leadership, but the strength of the partnership he now shared openly with Elena in governing the Voss territory. Elena spent weeks preparing for this gathering, though her preparation now carried none of the anxious uncertainty that had characterized her earlier attempts at diplomatic engagement. She understood the protocols thoroughly, having lived and breathed pack politics for months, rather than merely studying them from Mira's careful instruction. She understood the personalities involved, having built genuine relationships with representatives from allied territories through her ongoing involvement in pack governance. And she understood, perhaps most importantly, her own worth within this partnership, a confidence hard-won through months of proving herself capable, despite Cassandra's earlier attempts to convince everyone, including Elena herself, that she belonged nowhere near positions of genuine influence. The evening began with formal greetings, Elena and Damien standing together at the entrance to receive each arriving delegation, their partnership evident in every small gesture, the way Damien consulted her quietly before finalizing certain diplomatic arrangements, the way visiting representatives now addressed questions to both of them, equally, rather than directing everything exclusively toward the Alpha King alone. Alpha Garrick arrived among the later delegations, his expression carrying none of the earlier guarded skepticism that had defined their first meeting months before. Alpha Damien, Luna Elena, he said warmly, extending greetings to both of them with equal genuine respect. I must say, the resolution of recent misunderstandings between our territories has strengthened my confidence in this alliance considerably. Few leaders handle such delicate crises with the grace both of you demonstrated. Elena felt genuine pride at this acknowledgement, a stark contrast to his earlier guarded assessment during their first meeting. Thank you, Alpha Garrick, she replied warmly. I believe our territories share a genuine commitment to lasting peace, and I am grateful we found a path through recent difficulties that strengthened rather than damaged that shared commitment. Throughout the evening's formal proceedings, Elena moved confidently among the assembled delegates, engaging in substantive conversations about trade agreements, border security, and regional cooperation, her contributions valued and respected by representatives who had, months earlier, barely acknowledged her presence beyond polite formality. The transformation was not lost on anyone present, particularly not on Damien, who found himself watching her throughout the evening, with quiet, profound admiration. During a brief moment alone together, on a private balcony overlooking the gathered celebration below, Damien took Elena's hand gently, his expression carrying a seriousness that suggested he had something important to share. "I have been thinking about something for weeks now," he said quietly, watching her carefully. "When we married, it was an arrangement born from political necessity, nothing more. I did not choose you, not truly, not in any way that reflected genuine personal desire. But somewhere during these past months, watching you navigate crisis after crisis with courage and grace, watching you rebuild trust with a household that had failed you so completely, I have come to feel something I never expected to feel toward you." Elena's breath caught slightly, uncertain exactly where this conversation was leading, though something warm and hopeful stirred within her chest at his words. "I love you," Damien said simply, the words carrying quiet, genuine conviction. "Not out of obligation, not out of guilt over past failures, but because you have become someone I genuinely cannot imagine leading this pack without. Someone whose company brings me genuine joy, rather than merely dutiful companionship. I should have recognized your worth from the very beginning of our marriage, and I am sorry it took so long for me to see clearly what was standing right beside me all along." Tears gathered in Elena's eyes, though these tears carried none of the loneliness and pain that had defined her earlier crying within these same castle walls. "I love you as well," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly with genuine emotion. "I did not expect, during those earlier lonely months, that I would ever come to feel such genuine affection for you. But you have proven, through consistent action, rather than empty words, that the man I married is capable of far greater depth and care than I initially believed possible." They stood together quietly on the balcony for a long moment, the sounds of celebration continuing below them, neither feeling any particular urgency to rejoin the festivities immediately, content simply to remain together in this quiet moment of genuine connection that felt, finally, entirely secure. When they eventually returned to the gathering, something between them had visibly shifted, a warmth and closeness that even the most casual observer could not fail to notice. Mira, watching from across the hall, felt genuine happiness swell within her chest at the sight of her brother and sister-in-law standing so comfortably close together, their earlier distant formality entirely replaced by genuine affection. "I told you he would not do things halfway once he finally understood," Mira said quietly to herself, smiling as she watched the couple return to the celebration, greeted warmly by delegates from across the region who had, over recent months, come to genuinely respect the partnership these two individuals had built together, both as pack leaders and, evidently, as something considerably more personal as well. The gathering continued late into the evening, filled with music, laughter, and genuine celebration of alliances renewed and strengthened. Elena danced with Damien beneath torchlight, surrounded by representatives from territories that had once viewed her with skepticism or outright dismissal, now watching her with genuine warmth and respect. A transformation that reflected not merely her own personal growth, but the genuine partnership she and Damien had built together through months of careful, deliberate effort. As the celebration finally began winding down, and guests retired gradually to their prepared quarters throughout the castle, Elena found herself standing once more in the same kitchen where Damien had first discovered her crying alone so many months earlier. She had wandered there almost without conscious thought, drawn perhaps by memory rather than any practical necessity, since the kitchen staff now handled every task without requiring her personal involvement. Damien found her there shortly after, standing quietly near the same counter where he had once found her exhausted and weeping, though her expression now carried nothing but peaceful contentment, rather than the desperate loneliness that had once defined her late-night presence within this particular room. "This is where everything changed," she said softly, as Damien approached and settled beside her. "I know," he replied quietly, wrapping his arms gently around her from behind. "I think about that night often, Elena. The guilt I felt discovering how deeply you had suffered without my knowledge. But I am grateful, in a strange way, that it happened here, in this particular room, because it reminds me constantly of exactly how far we have come together since that difficult beginning." Elena turned within his embrace, meeting his gaze with genuine warmth and security, that had once seemed entirely impossible within these castle walls. "We have come very far indeed," she agreed softly, "and I would not trade the journey, difficult as parts of it were, for anything else. It led us here, together, and that makes every difficult moment worthwhile." Autumn arrived with golden light spreading across the castle grounds, and with it came preparations for a ceremony unlike anything the Voss territory had witnessed in generations. A formal recognition of Elena's standing as Luna, not merely through marriage, but through demonstrated leadership and genuine partnership that the entire pack had come to recognize and celebrate over the preceding months. The idea had originated with the pack elders themselves, who approached Damien several weeks earlier with a proposal that surprised him initially, though he quickly recognized its significance. Traditionally, they explained, such formal recognition ceremonies were reserved for Lunas who had proven themselves through extraordinary service to the pack, a rare honor rather than an automatic consequence of marriage alone. Given everything Elena had accomplished, from resolving the diplomatic crisis with Garrick's territory to establishing herself as a genuine partner in pack governance, the elders believed she had more than earned this recognition. When Damien brought the proposal to Elena, she reacted with genuine surprise and humility, uncertain whether she truly deserved such significant honor. "I have simply tried to do what seemed right, given the circumstances," she said modestly. "I do not know if that warrants such formal recognition." "You have done far more than simply what seemed right," Damien replied firmly. "You have transformed this pack's fortunes through your wisdom and courage, Elena, and the elders recognize that clearly, even if you remain too humble to acknowledge it fully yourself." The ceremony was scheduled for the autumn equinox, drawing representatives from every allied territory within the region, including Alpha Garrick himself, who had specifically requested attendance given the significant role Elena had played in strengthening peace between their two territories. Elena spent the days leading up to the ceremony in a whirlwind of preparation, though she found herself approaching these preparations with far greater calm and confidence than she had brought to any earlier gathering during her time within the castle. She had, after all, proven herself capable time and again, and that hard-won confidence now informed every aspect of her presence within pack affairs. Mira helped her prepare on the morning of the ceremony itself, the two women having grown close enough over the preceding months that their relationship now resembled genuine sisterhood, rather than merely polite familiarity. "You have come so far since that first difficult morning when you arrived here as a stranger," Mira observed, carefully arranging Elena's hair for the formal ceremony ahead. "I am proud to call you my sister, Elena, in every sense that truly matters." Elena felt tears gathering, though these tears, like so many of her recent tears, carried nothing but genuine warmth and gratitude. "Thank you, Mira," she said softly. "Your friendship made these past months bearable during the difficult times, and joyful during everything that followed. I do not know how to properly express what your support has meant to me." The ceremony itself took place in the Great Hall, transformed for the occasion, with autumn flowers and warm golden light streaming through tall windows. Elena stood before the assembled crowd, wearing a gown crafted specifically for this occasion, deep gold fabric that caught the afternoon light beautifully, as she walked slowly toward the raised platform, where Damien waited alongside the pack elders. Representatives from every allied territory watched with genuine respect as the eldest pack elder began the formal recognition ceremony, describing in careful detail the specific accomplishments that had earned Elena this significant honor. Her role in resolving the diplomatic crisis with Garrick's territory, her careful stewardship of the Ashwood Alliance during a period of significant tension, her consistent demonstration of wisdom and courage throughout challenges that would have overwhelmed many far more experienced leaders. Alpha Garrick rose, during a designated moment in the ceremony, offering his own formal acknowledgement of Elena's contributions to regional peace, words that carried particular weight given his own territory's complicated history with the Voss pack. "I have watched this Luna grow from an uncertain newcomer into one of the most capable leaders I have encountered across this entire region," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent hall. "Our territories owe her a debt of gratitude for the peace we now enjoy, peace that seemed genuinely uncertain not so very long ago." When the formal ceremony concluded, Damien took Elena's hand before the entire assembled crowd, his expression carrying open, unguarded affection that would have seemed impossible during the early distant months of their marriage. "When you first arrived in this castle," he said, addressing not merely Elena but the entire assembled gathering, I failed to see you clearly. Consumed as I was by duties I believed more pressing than the woman standing beside me. That failure cost you months of unnecessary suffering. Suffering I did not recognize until circumstances finally forced me to see what had been happening beneath my own roof. I will forever regret that failure, but I am profoundly grateful for the woman who emerged from that difficult beginning. Someone whose strength, wisdom, and genuine care for this pack have transformed not merely our marriage, but this entire territory's future. Elena felt tears streaming freely now, though the assembled crowd's warm, approving murmurs made clear these were tears shared in celebration rather than isolation. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying clearly despite her emotion. "I did not imagine, during those earlier lonely months, that I would ever stand here today, surrounded by genuine friends and allies, loved and respected for exactly who I am, rather than merely tolerated for the title I carry. This pack has become my home in every sense that matters, and I am grateful beyond words for everyone who helped make that transformation possible." The celebration that followed continued long into the evening, music and laughter filling halls that had once felt so cold and unwelcoming to Elena during her earliest days within these walls. She danced with Damien beneath warm candlelight, surrounded by friends who had once been strangers, respected by leaders who had once doubted her worth entirely. Later that evening, as the celebration finally wound down and most guests had retired to their quarters, Elena found herself standing once more near the kitchen, though this time she was not alone, and she was not crying from loneliness or exhaustion. Damien stood beside her, along with Mira, and even Callum, who had worked diligently over recent months to rebuild trust within the household following Cassandra's earlier actions. "This kitchen holds quite a story," Mira observed with a gentle smile, glancing around the familiar room where so much had changed for her brother and sister-in-law. "It does indeed," Damien agreed, wrapping his arm gently around Elena's shoulders. "But I think, moving forward, this room will hold considerably happier memories than the ones that first brought us together here." Elena smiled, leaning contentedly against him, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her well-being, secure within a home that had once felt so isolating and cold. Whatever challenges still awaited them in the future, whatever difficulties might yet arise within pack governance or regional diplomacy, Elena faced them now, not as an isolated outsider, struggling silently within unfamiliar walls, but as a genuine partner, deeply loved and profoundly respected, standing exactly where she belonged. The Alpha King had once failed to see the woman standing quietly beside him, suffering in silence beneath his own roof, while he remained consumed by duties he believed more urgent than her well-being. But that failure, however painful its cost, ultimately gave way to something far more valuable: a genuine partnership built through shared adversity, mutual respect, and love that had grown slowly but powerfully from the most unlikely of beginnings. And as autumn light faded gently over the castle that had finally, truly become her home, Elena understood that whatever came next, she would never again face it alone.